Today is Thursday, April 20th, and you're listening to Plastic Weekly. This week, I talked to Luigi Montilla, the founder of Canada's bouldering series for everybody, the Tour de Bloc, now running for 14 years. Stick around. Hey guys, I'm really excited to bring you the interview that I've got for you today with Luigi Montilla. A couple weeks ago, I got to commentate on the live stream for the championship of the Tour de Bloc, which a lot of people outside of Canada are starting to get to know. We take for granted in Canada that we have a national bouldering series that is built for everybody, for little kids, for recreational adults, for pro adults, and that's been getting a lot of attention. And there's a lot of folks that are curious about how they can start something similar or how they can help grow that kind of event in their country. So today I spoke with him to help give people an idea of the history of the Tour de Bloc, why it started, and what was going on in the scene when it began, and also what Luigi thinks makes it relevant today and why it's something that other places should still be trying to do. Before I get to that interview, though, I want to just direct your attention to something that I've put up on the website. I'm no stats guy. I haven't done anything math related since high school. But we've been talking a lot about how the new 4-minute rule change in bouldering finals will or won't affect the schedule of bouldering events. And I realized that nobody's really posted anything to analyze or take a look at what has been going on with bouldering finals. So really quickly, I just started adding up the duration of boulder finals over the last 3 years, so 2014, 15, and 16. I omitted World Championships and I omitted Caso from last year because if you remember, they ran the men and women separately, so it was a very long final. But I just kind of got an average of how long a bouldering World Cup takes, and that's something that I've posted on the website in the show notes for this episode, so you can take a look and see how long different bouldering World Cups have lasted from the moment the first climbers turn around to face their problem until the moment the final climber falls or tops. I didn't include the time before the actual climbing starts or the time after the climbing starts because, in my opinion, that time isn't affected by this rule change. It's really just the actual time during the climbing. I harvested this info just by going through old video replays on the IFSC YouTube page, so I think they're generally accurate, but the duration posted does include any weird things like technicals. It includes the events that had 7 athletes in a category instead of just 6. It includes any odd, if there was a commercial break forced on by the organizers or anything like that. It was all built in there, so it's a very rough average of what a bouldering final looks like in terms of how long it takes. I encourage you guys to take a look at it. It gives you an idea of what the average is, what the range of differences in times are. And I've also thrown in a standard deviation, which I honestly don't know if that's the thing I should be using. If you're a stat head and you have any input on what info we could pull out of it or what things would apply better to measuring these times, let me know and I'll update it. And as the World Cups progress, I will keep posting what the durations are for these new comps with this new rule and see if there is actually any difference, if there's a more consistent duration showing up, if they are all ending shorter or lasting longer than before. It's just an opportunity to actually take a look at something and see what the data was before and start tracking what the data is now. So if you're interested, plasticweekly.com, you'll find that in the show notes for today's episode. But let's ignore that stuff for now. I want to bring you the interview from this week. So again, this is Luigi Montilla talking about the Tour de Bloc, which now has gone on for 14 years in Canada, comps across the country every single season. It's the first comp I attended. It's the first comp I volunteered for. It means a lot to Canadians. And so if you're Canadian, you're going to learn a lot about the series that is so prevalent in our country. And if you're not Canadian, you're going to learn about a comp series that never specified like the ABS did, where the ABS really started focusing honestly on kids, and it also stuck around on like the PCA and the UBC and all those things. This one actually kept going. So I hope you guys enjoy this interview, and I'll talk to you guys after the segment. While Europe is booming and the United States will always have some of the biggest National Series comps, Canada is still here with a few gems, and one of those gems is the Tour de Bloc, one of the only remaining national competition series in North America. It's been around now for over 14 years, and I'm lucky to sit with the original creator and founder of the Tour de Bloc, Luigi Montilla. Did I pronounce that right? I probably should have asked you beforehand.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. Like, there's a few pronunciations, and that's acceptable.
Where does that come from?
It's I was born in the Philippines.
Okay, so a Spanish
it's
background
like a
then?
Spanish background.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So Tour de Bloc just finished season 14. It's been around for 14 years. It started in 2003, and there's been a lot of interest from people, especially outside of Canada, who don't know what it is. In the States, there are obviously a lot of boulder competitions. Most of them are focused on kids, and then you get those kind of one-off comps like the Dark Horse and other comps that you'll get, at most, a Dark Horse season is really 2 or 3 months with only a couple events. Tour de Bloc at its peak was over 20 events in a season all across Canada, ending with a championship. And a lot of people are curious, like, is this something the United States should have? So I want to talk to you and kind of get a breakdown of how it works. But first of all, it started in 2003. Can you paint a picture for me of what competition climbing in Canada looked like back in the day?
Back in the day. There were a bunch of comps happening, but they were all kind of independent of each other. Like Ottawa Coyote Rock Gym was running their Fall Classic. It was definitely like one of the best comps, during that time. Rockheads was hosting the Canadian Bouldering Championships. Cliffhanger and The Edge were hosting the Krankenstein in Vancouver. I was like, these are all great events, but they're all kind of in different parts of the country where, they're kind of running independent of each other. So, the idea was that I was already involved in competitions through like sponsorship. Kind of just thought like, hey, there's probably something else that we can do in terms of trying to bring these events under one kind of banner, and kind of help the events, garner more attention, and kind of more eyeballs, just to increase the profile of each event, and therefore potentially kind of help the growth of climbing across the country.
So if I was a recreational boulder back then, what could my competition calendar look like? If I was just a for-fun guy that liked the idea of competing, how many comps could I do in a year if I was Toronto-based?
If you're Toronto-based, maybe I'd say 3 comps throughout the winter season. It was a kind of a dreadful long winter season, especially if you're a competition climber. There was a lot of travel involved. You could have to go to the U.S. for some events, like Planet Rock in Michigan hosted some. Like I said, Ottawa, you'd have to go. There were some in Quebec as well. It wasn't like it is today, where every other week there seems to be like a competition. So I'd say you get one big comp a season if you're lucky, and if you happen to live in a province where there's only a few climbing gyms, then you definitely would have to travel to find that fix for comp climbing.
So you mentioned you were involved in sponsorship. Who were you back in 2003? Like today, Luigi Montilla is a guy that's run World Cups, and you've got your own hold company, and you opened a gym just recently. You've been kind of one of the big guys in climbing. So at that point, who were you in the climbing scene?
So I got my start in climbing in 97, 98. My brother actually introduced me to the sport. At first, I was pretty hesitant about it because I just couldn't grasp the concept of, going inside, climbing up a wall, and just to come down again. But essentially, my first exposure was like kind of watching the X Games and seeing like the energy and just what the athletes were doing. And I kind of got hooked from there. I kind of started climbing. I worked at Joe Rockheads for a couple of years. And then Friction was kind of born out of working at a climbing gym.
And that's your hold company?
Yeah, that's the whole company. And from that's how I got involved with competitions, sponsoring events, and then sponsoring a few athletes that attended the events. And that kind of, the brainstorm of like, wait, we should do something else. We should do something more to kind of give back. The Tour de Bloc was born in 2003, and we're coming up on 15 years, which is pretty amazing, especially when you see, kids now that,
they weren't alive.
They weren't alive. So it
started.
gives you this feeling of like wow, you've created something, or you've dedicated a good portion of your life to something that is now going on 15 years. Yeah.
So you mentioned that a lot of these events not a lot, but a bunch of events happened around Canada, and you were trying to unify them. Were there any influences down in the States, or any comp series or anything that kind of, you mentioned the X Games as another influence, but when you structured it, what influenced you to do it the way you did?
Well, essentially, the U.S. had kind of regional series as well. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, which then became essentially the ABS, the American Bouldering Series. At the time that I started the Tour de Bloc, it was kind of based around, the ABS, the PCA, and it was kind of the tour was essentially a combination of like a pro event, but at the same time it was grassroots. So kind of both needed each other to kind of flourish, and that we needed to expose the sport to as many people as we could, but at the same time, the kind of the foundation of the sport, the recreational climber, it would be great for them to see what the top level athletes were kind of doing, so that they had something to aim for, and people to look up to essentially kind of kickstart their climbing, or their passion for climbing, and take them to that next level. So I would say, like, definitely the ABS had that whole kind of competitions across the country, using the same format, using the same rules, was the basis for the Tour de Bloc.
Okay. You mentioned some of those comps, and of course, most of them don't exist anymore. The ones that do, the ABS is mostly dominated by youth climbing. It's almost entirely a youth series, except for at the very end. And of course, now it's USA Bouldering or whatever. Did you ever feel the pressure in the Tour de Bloc to focus on either youth climbing or pro open climbing?
There's definitely a portion. Depends who you talk to. There are a group of people that wanted to go one direction, and then there's a group of people that wanted to go the opposite direction. So it was kind of a hard balance in terms of like trying to appease both, and I think we found a decent formula in terms of being able to have the recreational climber as well as attract the higher end, kind of the elite level climbers at both events, or at the Tour de Bloc events. Now the one thing that was inevitable when we started this was the youth movement, and how that would affect competitions. And obviously, as you know now, the youth climbing circuits within each province is flourishing, and and now they're hosting 2-day events just for a local. So that was definitely something that we knew was going to happen, but we didn't really anticipate like how fast and how big it would get, and hence the somewhat split between kind of the youth specific events and the Tour de Bloc events. Yeah.
We talked a lot about the history, and I want to make sure people understand what a Tour de Bloc is. So first of all, the comp series is multiple events across Canada, starting generally in October, wraps up in March or April. All of the events are separate, and they're hosted by gyms that sign up for it. If you're a competitor, what's the experience of a Tour de Bloc? Like, how much does it cost? What are the categories? Like, how does the day run as you experience a tour?
Yeah, the one thing that we wanted to do was standardize each event. So essentially, if you go to an event in Ontario and you go to one in Quebec, or you go to one in BC, it would essentially be the same event in terms of you register through one portal, which is comp season. You sign up for more or less the same age categories, or we've switched over to primarily age categories this season. going away from the recreational, experience, and open categories, just in terms of we felt that was kind of a barrier to a lot of people's first kind of climbing experience, because they didn't know where they actually fall, whether they're a recreational climber. They feel that they're a recreational climber, but they've been climbing for 2 or 3 years. It's their first comp, so I should be in rec. Or a new climber that doesn't want to compete with someone that's been climbing for X amount of years. And same thing for the adults. They didn't want to compete with kind of kids that are like 15 years of age, and they're trying to hold down a full-time job, a family, and whatnot. But yeah, essentially it's it's everything standard. So you sign up, and the entrance fees are standard as well. So it's been around $45-50 essentially for the past, I'd say, 10 years at least. Everyone gets a 3-hour round of climbing. For the elite or open level climbers, there's a qualification round, then proceeds to a final round.
And what kind of climbing? Like, we're dealing with a scramble format for the most part?
Yeah,
like
it's scramble
50, 60
format.
problems?
Yeah. Again, 40 to 60 problems depending on the size of the facility and the size of the field. And then, finals, the top 6 to 8 finalists go on and kind of duke it out in a ISO format final. So essentially it's perceived to be a little bit bigger and a more important event than your just regular kind of local comp at your local climbing gym. The type of competitor that comes to the Tour de Bloc kind of are more seasoned, especially the elite level athletes. They go to these events because they know that there are going to be climbers from different parts of the city or different parts of the province. Throughout the years, we've more climbers are traveling between provinces, which I think has only been a positive, in that they try to expose themselves to different climbing gyms, different terrain, different styles of route setting. So kind of trying to get out of that bubble that a lot of the times we find ourselves in, and kind of trying to climb somewhere else and just expose yourself to different ideas.
Yeah. Another nice thing about the Tour de Bloc, so you've got these series of Tour de Bloc local events across the country, and then you have the national championship, the Tour de Bloc championship in March or April. And you don't have to do anything necessarily to qualify for that. So the nice thing is you end the season with this basically a big party where you don't have to worry about attending a certain amount of events or in different places or anything like that. And as a championship, it's nice because anybody can show up, so you still get the kind of local vibe that you would get anywhere else, where anybody can still show up. You still get all the kids that are psyched, and the recreational adults and the elite.
It's really all about being inclusive. I think I feel that we're not yet at a point where we have to restrict who can compete at the events. It's all about again trying to get as many people into it, trying to get as many people exposed to it, especially at the high level kind of championship level, where you do see the best climbers in the nation, right?
Mm-hmm. What would you say is kind of an average attendance for a local, just so people get an idea of what it's like?
I'd say anywhere between 150 to 200, I say, is about average. Now we were getting comps like Calgary Climbing Center. I think the past 2-3 years they've been pulling in 300 people. So it is a crazy number, especially considering that it is an indoor type of competition, and trying to run that many people through takes a lot of kind of resources and time. So I got to hand it to them how they've managed to kind of increase the number of competitors, but at the same time keep the level, the quality of the event up there.
So you recently, you've opened your own gym here in Mississauga. We're in it right now. It's up the block in Mississauga, and you hosted the national championship for the Tour de Bloc just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
So this entire time that you've been running the Tour de Bloc, you've worked in gyms before, but you've never been a gym owner. How has the experience of being involved from the gym side changed how you think about the comps? Or what have you learned from actually hosting your own first Tour de Bloc after having organized it for 14 years?
It is like a pretty surreal experience in that I'm used to gym owners handing over their facility for me to kind of, organize the event. And after the event is done, I say my thank yous and basically walk out the door. The one difference is, you're kind of left holding the bag as everyone leaves. Your job starts essentially, or restarts. So, the aspect of trying to limit the closure of the facility so it doesn't affect your members, and at the same time, after the comp is done, you have to put it back as fast as you can. The financial side is a completely different beast as well. But all in all, I think I've had organizing the World Cup has somewhat prepared me for organizing a comp in my own gym. The big difference is it takes about the same amount of work, but at least the gym stays. And with the World Cup, for example, it takes you a year to organize it, 2 days to host it, and then you have a week to take it all down. So at least this thing stays up and people get to enjoy it right after the comp.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that Joe Rockheads, back before the Tour de Bloc, hosted the bouldering championships for Canada. That was the championships. I'm assuming that would choose a Canadian national team if there was one at the time.
Yeah,
there would have been. Boulder World Cups would have been a couple years old at that point. Now, did Tour de Bloc kind of absorb that? And Tour de Bloc for a long time was, I believe, associated with the event that would choose the Canadian national team and crown the national champion for bouldering.
Yeah, so essentially it was, I approached CC way back when the Tour de Bloc started in 2003.
That's the Canadian national body.
Yeah, essentially it was, I found it important to make sure that the stakeholders were involved in whatever the Tour de Bloc was going to be, because it doesn't make sense to try and reinvent the wheel or do something in conjunction with, something that's already established. So I basically approached the, I think at that point it was Climbing Canada or some iteration of the CEC. I've seen a bunch of them kind of throughout the years, and but in any case, I just told them that I was running this national series. I'd love for you guys to be involved by sanctioning the series. I would basically create the schedule and contact the gyms, make sure they run the formats that are and follow the rules of the National Federation, and essentially be that vehicle to choose that the national bouldering team. And we did that for a good, I'd say, 10 seasons before changes happened. So so I mean, until now there are some events that are still part of the PSO series, and there is still a potential for a Tour de Bloc event to be a national series event or a national championship event.
Yeah, it's something that in the live stream there was a bunch of confusion sometimes when people realized that Canada has 2 national bouldering championships and people were unsure of what was going on. Canada, really there's just 4 provincial bodies, so sub-national bodies. Each one hosts a competition to choose who goes to nationals, and nationals selects the team, and that used to be associated with the Tour de Bloc. Did the Tour de Bloc lose any steam when it was no longer officially a part of choosing the national series?
Yes and no. I think for me personally, the motivations of creating the Tour de Bloc and continuing to run it were kind of based on being part of a bigger picture, helping the sport grow, helping kind of the national body, create a program for climbers to compete under, the rules and all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, I've kind of if they don't want me, then screw it. I'm just going to do my own thing. But that obviously quickly faded. the gyms were still psyched on it. They still saw value in it, which was actually the kind of the best feeling to have, in that regardless of it being sanctioned, the gyms were still behind it. And it kind of opened my eyes in terms of what the Tour de Bloc can be, kind of moving forward, and what role it kind of plays within the just the climbing scene in Canada.
Okay. So the industry now, climbing in Canada, climbing everywhere, is 14 years removed from what it was back when the Tour de Bloc started. Yeah. I can't, I was not a climber back then. I don't know what it was like. But there's certainly been exponential growth since then. What, if you could, I don't really know how to word this, but if you could basically start this whole thing over again, is the Tour de Bloc what it is right now? Is that what you would want it to be for the current world of climbing? Like, is Tour de Bloc where it should be based on how everything has changed?
I'd like to say that the Tour de Bloc has been one of the constants in the ever-changing world of competition climbing in Canada.
It has, for sure. Like, it is. You can count on that thing. You can set your watch to it.
So, I mean, and that means we've always managed to stay relevant in terms of what what we do season after season. Would I change anything really? Hard to say. Like me personally, I feel I do my best work organizing events. I'm not one to create policy, enforce policy, and just essentially create rules to make it easier or harder for gyms to host these events. So I feel that I'm kind of like a foot soldier, for lack of a better word, in terms of I'm a doer, and this is what I want to do. It's as the sport gets more organized, things change. And as far as the Tour de Bloc, I think we've managed to weather those changes and again still be relevant. And it's still when someone says Tour de Bloc, I think there's immediately they know what it is if you're into competition climbing, anyways. And there is a greater expectation of what the event is. So in that sense, for me, what the legacy of the Tour de Bloc is it kind of helped usher in the sport of climbing, and establish it kind of nationally as like a sport that people can take part in at a recreational level or a more kind of quote unquote professional level. I mean, I'd like to also think that in terms of the events that are happening now, that it stemmed from what the Tour de Bloc kind of created way back in 2003.
From a gym perspective, most gym owners, most gym runners know that for the most part, when they host a competition, if you want to do it, the way that looks great with the lights and the video and all that stuff, generally you lose money on a comp, right? That's just how it is. There are definitely ways to do it so you make money. You just have to kind of give up the cool stuff. And we all accept that. We were talking about how almost every single weekend there's a comp now here in Ontario and the Greater Toronto area. You're dealing with youth series comps that take 2 days, Tour de Blocs and other recreational competitions. As a gym owner, where every comp you do is going to probably cost you more money than it would make you, what's the argument for hosting it? Let's say I run a gym and I'm going to host one comp in a year. I can host a youth comp that will bring in 200 kids. I can host a recreational comp in the summer that's very low cost. I can host a Tour de Bloc, which is a bigger name and probably get more people to it. What's the argument, business-wise, rational-wise, sports fan-wise? Why should I be hosting a Tour de Bloc? Why should I choose that one?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, and it's funny enough. I've never really had a hard time selling it to a gym owner, and I think part of that is the Tour de Bloc has built a name for itself in terms of what the event is, how people perceive it, the amount of people that go to it, the quality of climbers that attend it, and because you're part of it's a bigger picture altogether. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely like a financial kind of aspect to it that gym owners have to kind of struggle with. But I think the pros outweigh the cons in terms of hosting the event. And when it comes down to it, the gym owner, they know that financially it might not be the best decision to make, but there are intangibles that are hard to quantify when you host these events. You create a lot of buzz around your facility, especially now with the age of social media. Photos immediately are put out there, shared. So there's a cost there that is somewhat a little bit difficult to quantify in terms of what it means, but yeah, I mean, it's still, like I said, the Tour de Bloc brand is still very well known. People will seek it out. They will always ask their local gyms why they're not hosting a Tour de Bloc comp, which is great publicity for us. I think, like I said, again, it's the brand essentially has or carries weight in the Canadian climbing scene. So it's people just buy into it. There's really no hard pitch. Like, if you know me, I'm not one to try and really twist your arm into doing something. I try and ask nicely, with a smile, and normally people either pass on it, but luckily enough, more people kind of just say, yeah, let's do it.
So you just wrapped up season 14, and we're months away from the start of the next one. It's probably not on your radar at the moment, but I know for sure, just knowing you're probably thinking already about what you want to change. Tour de Bloc has managed to stay relevant for 14 years. Can you give us any idea, maybe not necessarily particular things, but what's on your mind and how you want to have things progress next year?
Well, next year is after 14 is 15. When I started it was a year one was like, let's see if I can do it again. After year two was like, okay, let's try to do 5 years. After the 5th year, 10 would be a nice round number, and then let's see what happens after that. And the goal of the 10th year was to also host a World Cup, and we did that. We did it for 3 years. After that, I was, okay, what now? Let's try to get the Tour de Bloc to 15 years. So, and it happened so fast that essentially after this season ended, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next to somewhat, kind of top the year that I had as far as opening up the block and, hosting the Tour Championships at my own facility. And basically 15 years is a significant amount of time to be spending on one thing. And what would we do differently to kind of make 15 like a year that would be significant. So we're planning a bunch of things in terms of what type of events we're running. So kind of next year, I think we're going to do 4 big events, one in each province, not that are kind of similar to national level events. So we're going to try and see if the community will support something like the Dark Horse Series, but in different parts of the country as opposed to just one facility essentially. And we're also going to try and apply for the national championships for open bouldering to coincide with the Tour de Bloc championships to kind of see if we can
bring it to keep it together
full circle again. And so far I think there's a bit of support behind that idea. Hopefully a bit of nostalgia will sway the people that make that decision, but I definitely know that we have the facility to be able to do that. We have the resources to be able to put on an event that I think will rival any other kind of national level event. So yeah, it's more or less kind of doing the same thing but doing it better. So in terms of production quality, being able to offer the live stream, which you were a big part of, and yeah, so it's more or less, 15 years will show a more polished product, I think, and again, trying a different approach in terms of the type and size of the events that we're going to throw.
There's certainly a lot of people that, especially in the States, where they want to start hosting some more local comps, especially for adults, because there's not a ton of that. And there's a lot of markets in the States that are really underserved by boulder comps. You've been doing it for a while now. Do you have any pointers for anybody that's trying to start tying together a few events? Any values or anything that they should know ahead of time?
Yeah, you know what, I started in a time where, it was, the psych was high on competition climbing, and I kind of just somewhat lucked into, kind of creating the Tour de Bloc in a way. But once you start it, you then realize, like, oh my God, it's a lot of work. It's not like people aren't just going to come down and kind of throw prizes at you and basically, here's $1,000, $10,000, and do what you will with it. It's a lot of hard work. You need to create something that is somewhat unique, and it's hard to do nowadays because it's, we're in an age where, everything is instant gratification. You go onto Google, YouTube, or whatever, you find something that that potentially is similar to what you want to do, and someone's already done it. So, I would start small, and make sure that you iron out your process, and make sure that you're, everyone that that participates in the event that you're running is psyched on it, before you start dreaming of kind of grandiose plans in terms of, giving out thousands of dollars in cash money, and trying to get the big names to come to your event. I would say that, start off small, make sure you do it well, and kind of let the event grow kind of naturally, instead of forcing something that, that you won't be able to sustain. That's the one big thing I think about the climbing industry, is that, success sometimes comes pretty fast, and we're unable to essentially kind of grow as fast as the demand for it. And sometimes what we do is throw money at it, and it doesn't become the sustainable thing. And same thing with kind of the World Cup. The sport, I don't think, is in a place where we can produce an event like, what the Olympics expects us to do, especially for a local event. So I would say kind of just, keep it fun, keep it simple, and kind of build from there.
You've been doing this comp thing for a long time, and you're one of the few polymaths in climbing where you've been on multiple sides of the coin, in management, running a gym, running World Cups, making holds, all that kind of stuff, and climber, obviously. After doing it for a while, do you see any changes coming down the pipe to competition climbing in general in North America, around the world, that you're excited for or concerned about, or anything that you feel like you're going to have to start dealing with in the next couple of years?
I don't know. Obviously, the Olympic thing is the biggest thing that's potentially happened to the sport. What the fallout is, I don't know yet. I guess I'm still trying to figure it out. I know there's a mad scramble for, to get on that kind of bandwagon, in terms of gyms opening up and kids wanting to be the next Olympic star, get on that Wheaties box. I don't know what the real fallout will be until, I guess, when we're closer to the actual Olympic Games. The interesting thing is we've essentially been running the same type of event, like for me personally, since 2003. It seems like it's the same type of event, and we're just trying to give it a better kind of production quality. And I'm actually waiting for someone to come up with something new, something that will really attract, the regular person to the sport. I mean, we've had, speed climbing, I think, was one attempt to do that. And the field is divided in terms of, how it's perceived. And deep water soloing is like another thing. It does feel that it has its place, but I don't know if it is the true representation of what our sport is. I'm kind of just waiting for someone to come up to me and have this kind of eureka moment of like, this is what we need to do to be able to move the sport to that next level.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been on the cusp of something, but we've never really managed to get ourselves over that hump. So, what I'm hoping, and with the Tour de Bloc, I think the goal was to always reach out to different people, to different parts of the country. And that's the one problem we have. It's such a big country. Like you were saying earlier, you want to go to 3 events in Europe this year, and they're all within 2-3 hours of each other. And you can drive in Ontario and still be in Ontario after 24 hours. That's how big the country is. So it's hard to do things with much effect because, people in Quebec will do things differently as people would in Alberta or BC would do. So, it would be great if we get a lot of people to kind of just sit down together and kind of figure what the next step is for us, and to not necessarily just follow what the other countries are doing. So we need to find a solution that kind of works best for us, in order for us to kind of develop the sport in a manner that works in our system.
I'm going to wrap it up just asking a question that I'm really curious about. I started climbing in 2009, and actually 3 months into my climbing career, I volunteered for a Tour de Bloc.
Awesome,
in season 9, I think it was, at Climbers Rock. And so my favorite memory of a Tour de Bloc is I'm like a new climber, and I'm sitting in isolation, which is just 3 tarps between walls with a bunch of guys who I realized are like younger than me, and they're killing it at these comps. I was really impressed. And one of the boulder problems for the comp had a lateral dyno in it that if you missed, you ended up tossing back into ISO. You would fall through the tarp back into isolation. I'll never forget that. It's one of my favorite things, and it just made me so impressed with climbing, and it made me so excited. You've seen way more comps than I have. You've traveled around to your own events. Are there any moments that stick out as moments that just got you incredibly excited about what you were doing?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of I have seen a lot of different comps and a lot of very interesting problems, kind of interesting kind of wins and that kind of thing. I don't know. That's like there's definitely one. I think it was the Nationals in Montreal at Alley Up. I can't remember the exact year, but I do remember the problem. I do remember.
I guess this is 2009. I think we're on the same page. We might be.
It was kind of the first year that we saw these big volumes that I think Delir had made, it was at the old Alley Up, and it was Simon Villeneuve that was climbing this problem in finals, and it's like seeing someone try and basically get up this problem, solve this problem by just kind of sheer kind of determination, trying to work around this big volume and topping it out and basically kind of riding it like a pony, like a bull, and slapping it. So that I think that is one of the more iconic kind of moments in like the Tour de Bloc, and lucky enough it's on video.
I'm gonna post a link for sure. Yeah, I gotta make sure people can see that. I think for me that's a very vivid memory, and talking about it now, it takes me back to kind of that whole time period. And kind of the excitement of that event, and it's actually times like these when you kind of reminisce, that it kind of gives you that it resets you, and you're like, okay, this is why
I do this stuff. It's for the memories, but you don't always want to be stuck in reliving the past, and you're always wanting to create new memories. So you're like, okay, that was really cool. How can we do something that is just as memorable as that, kind of moving forward? So.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thank you for all the comps, all the work you've done, all that stuff.
Thanks for having me.
It's been very memorable, and thanks for talking to me today, man.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
That's it for this week's episode of Plastic Weekly. Thanks to Luigi Montilla for answering my questions, and thanks to you guys for listening. Make sure you visit plasticweekly.com to find footnotes, references, and other bonus content related to this episode, including videos of Luigi and my favorite moments from Tour de Bloc. Our theme music is by Javelin. Plastic Weekly is currently self-funded, and I'm not airing ads just yet, so please support it by subscribing on iTunes or Google Play, leave it a good review, and share it with your friends. You have no idea how much it helps the podcast. I could never make Plastic Weekly without the generous support of Climbers Rock in Burlington, Ontario. You can read more about this episode and leave a comment at plasticweekly.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can send me an email to tyler@plasticweekly.com with your comments, concerns, questions, compliments. Just tell me you're out there somewhere. Good luck to everybody competing this weekend in China at the World Cup, in Ontario and Quebec at their difficulty provincials, and anywhere else in North America that you're going to be throwing down on some plastic. We'll be thinking about you. Talk to you next week.